Why did the Dolphins and Jalen Ramsey have to split up, Tom?
This
Why?
was really something that had been going on, Rich, for several months now, long before it became public when we reported back in April that the Dolphins and Jalen Ramsey and his agent David Mulugeta had talked and that they were going to trade him. This had been in the works for quite some time. And there were things that you've heard a little of this from Mike McDaniel and others in Miami in terms of what the culture was and some things that they felt like they needed to do better. If you rewind to a year ago, the Dolphins were coming off a situation where they had acquired Jalen Ramsey. He suffered that injury in training camp in the early stages, ended up coming back. This is 2023, but him and Vic Fangio never really clicked. And Vic Fangio ultimately was a parting of ways, but really Vic was getting fired. They were going to move on from Vic. He wanted to go back to Philly. Part of that, not the whole part by any stretch, but part of that was Jalen Ramsey didn't like that Vic was very set to his scheme and wasn't necessarily open to input or have the flexibility to put Jalen Ramsey what he thought were the positions to succeed. And so not only did they keep Jalen Ramsey while moving on from Vic, they also doubled down and paid Jalen Ramsey on a new extension last year in camp that made him once again the highest paid cornerback in the NFL. They also paid Tyreek Hill last year, and again on a deal that had time remaining. And then the Dolphins went through a year that was really frustrating on a lot of levels. They had a ton of injuries. Tua missed time once again. They didn't have either of their pass rushers. They just didn't play great. Tyreek didn't look like himself. And that led them to the point where they needed to really think about what this program was going to look like moving forward here. So in the end, then, how that ends up with Jalen Ramsey going to the Steelers, there were on and off talks, Rich, for weeks prior to this. And part of the question was within the league, would Jalen Ramsey ultimately accept a trade to go to Pittsburgh? He had never played in a cold weather climate before. Of course, Jalen had had his thumb on the scale in the previous trades when he went from Jacksonville to the Rams and from the Rams to Miami. There was a thought that LA was the most likely destination, but the Rams just didn't really have the cash and cap to pay Jalen Ramsey the full amount that he was due. The Chargers, never say never with how they operate in that front office, but never really sounded like they got to a point of making the type of offer that the Dolphins would consider. I know this, Chris Greer, the Dolphins GM, made a lot of phone calls, explored a lot of different things. Many of them were player for player types of trades because Jalen Ramsey had such a big number that if the Dolphins were going to get out of paying most or all of it, and they did ultimately get out from under paying most of it, they were going to have to take a high salary player in return. It just so happened that the Dolphins then also had a situation with Jonnu Smith, who happens to be the Steelers offensive coordinator Arthur Smith's favorite tight end, where he too became available. The Steelers had a guy in Minkah Fitzpatrick who's due $15.5 million this season. His ball production in particular over the last couple of years has not been the same. Minka's still only 28, but maybe not quite the same player he was the first time around in Miami. If they get a more versatile player, albeit one who's being paid more in Jalen Ramsey, they think they can do a lot of different things with him. And a bonus out of that trade then is they get a guy in Jonnu Smith who's coming off a productive season in Miami, and based upon his knowledge of the scheme going back to Atlanta, they think he's going to be plug and play despite missing the spring, and he'll be able to contribute immediately.
All right. Well, again, so a lot of numbers you just threw out there. And again, it's a $12 million contract for 1 year for Jonnu Smith, which triples his salary. It's 26.
It's a one-year, $12 million extension.
I got
so
it. Okay.
Probably works out to less than that. But point taken,
Okay.
yes, he is making more money in Pittsburgh than he was.
Right. The Steelers gave him a raise, essentially, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. And the Steelers gave a little bit of a raise to Jalen Ramsey,
not
or no?
Entirely.
Okay.
Jalen Ramsey got a raise, but that's because as conditions of the deal, the Dolphins already paid him $4 million back in March as part of his contract and a bonus.
Yes.
Then they had to take on $3 million, which was really 1.5 from this year and 1.5 from next year. So the Dolphins paid that out as a lump sum with $3 million. So in the end, Jalen Ramsey does make more money, which is great for Jalen Ramsey, another $1.5 million in 2025. But really, that's the Dolphins paying upfront 1.5 of his salary next year for him to end up in Pittsburgh.
Okay, so it's not the Steelers giving it to him, is what you're saying.
Right.
Okay.
Steelers are paying the vast majority. The other, whatever you subtract everything, it's around $20 million that the Steelers are paying Jalen Ramsey.
Understood. Catch the Rich Eisen Show live weekdays from 12 to 3 p.m. Eastern on Roku Sports Channel in the U.S.